Well, the first thing on our agenda tonight is welcome and introductions. So I'll read off the roll. Becky Beeman.
Here.
Russ Beaton.
Here.
Scott Canwine.
Here.
Katie Cincinnati.
Here.
Ken Collins. Ken. Beth Vargas Duncan.
Here.
Matthew Hale. Matthew. Levi Herrera Lopez. Stephen Jenkins.
Here.
Kathy Knock.
Here.
Ariel Leval.
Here.
Lee McKenzie.
Here.
Raquel Moore Green.
Good evening. Here.
Good evening. Sean Nickus here. Keith Norris.
Here.
Jean Palmametter.
Here.
Ray Quisenberry.
Here.
Nate Rafin.
Here.
David Reinhold.
Here.
Bill Rishi.
Here.
Gretchen Schilly.
Here.
Caitlin Strathdy. Caitlin. Bill Smalden.
Here.
TJ Sullivan.
Here.
Excellent. And Kathy Van Eckfort.
Here.
And that is the roll call. Next up, we have our public comments. And tonight we have Robin Graves.
Good evening, everyone. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Please start with your ward or address.
My address is 3252 Felina Avenue, Northeast. Coming before you guys tonight. Thank you. A little better. Coming before you tonight to urge you all to reconsider the budget cuts to the library. As it stands currently, evening hours have been cut, Sundays have been cut, and I'm coming to you today to urge you to do what you can to reinstate those. We have a couple of ideas that we've been floating. A progressive income tax for people who make over $150,000 per year. Obviously, you know, a substantial amount of revenue to be had there. Ending tax exemptions for construction downtown. I saw that there were some exemptions being given out for new constructions going in around the mall area. Another great source of revenue. And finally, changing the hotel tax to fund public services instead of going to a tourism budget. I spoke here a week or so ago, probably a few weeks now, and it seemed that in the budget for 2025, there was 1.3 million set aside for tourist promotion, and yet there was 1.1 million in cuts to the library. Almost one-to-one. It just seemed like kind of unnecessary. Furthermore, to stress the tax exemptions, it just seems silly to me that we turn out pockets, saying, oh, we just don't have the money for this or that, and then letting people go on without being adequately taxed. So anyway, I wanted to put this before you. The library is, in many ways the heart and soul of our community. It's a great place for after school activities, after work, leisure recreations. It's also just a quiet place to go in a world that is increasingly more and more filled with noise and chaos and disorder. It's just a nice place to go and to have. And so we don't want to see its services diminished any further. So I put that before you, not just on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the Salem area residents, to everyone that really values the library's place in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Let the record show that Levy has arrived and is present. Next up, we have the approval of the updated March 18th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to move to amend the agenda. Becky Beeman, Ward 7. I was going to recommend that we skip item 5 in the interest of time, but I hear there's a city councilman who's going to present that, so I don't want to do that. But I do want to recommend that we start item 7 with an extended discussion of the income tax option, including the work that Russ has done working with the chamber to personalize this with them.
Any discussion on that motion? Was there a second? Yeah, TJ seconded. Okay. Any discussion on that motion? I hear no discussion, so we can move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Hearing no nays, the ayes have it. And the next order of business is the approval of the March 18th updated meeting minutes. Bill, you wish to discuss the meeting minutes?
I want to move that we approve them.
Move to second, okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Next, we move on to the approval of the April 25th, 2024 meeting minutes. Okay, Scott moved to approve. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. And the meeting minutes are approved. So next up comes the Budget Committee update. And I believe that's where Moss Adams will be showing us some stuff.
Except that there's a counselor who's presenting.
I'll turn the speaker on so you can hear me better. My name is Linda Nishioka, and I am City Councilor for Ward 2, and I also serve as the Vice Chair for the Budget Committee. I'm here tonight to update you on the revenue. I'm here to update the Revenue Task Force on the reductions and adjustments the Budget Committee has approved. First off, I want to tell you I'm grateful for all the work that you're doing, for having applied to this committee, and I have watched some of your meetings, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing on this. I know that it is hard work, so thank you. The job of the Budget Committee is to analyze and recommend a budget to the city, and this is required by law. The Revenue Task Force was appointed to explore new and additional revenue sources and adjustments to the fees to sustain services that we do not have a dedicated revenue stream for. Together we are determining the future of the city and how it will continue to deliver the services that the community depends on. So I'll begin the presentation. Thank you. So the Budget Committee is made up of 18 members, the mayor, the 8 councilors, and 8 ward representatives, so 1 from each ward. So it's for the whole city, plus 1 member at large. And our job is to recommend the balanced budget to the City Council and to set the property tax levy. This was the final budget recommended to the City Council. It tells you how much money we bring in from 24 different revenue sources and how much we are spending. What you don't see here is the limitations on the resources. This shows all of our money, but approximately 78% of the resources and 74% of the expenses are non-general fund. These funds are dedicated to spending on specific work and programs like roads, water, and sewer. 26% of the expenditure budget is general fund and supports programs like police, fire, and code enforcement, libraries, parks, the courts, and other programs with no dedicated funding. Next slide. Thank you. The fiscal year 24 reductions were brought to us in January. And so there were 3 stages for the Budget Committee. The work of the Budget Committee started in January, and when we received a presentation on the financial forecast and a 5-year projection of revenues and expenditures. As we all know, the forecast shows that without reductions, we would spend down the fund balance in 2 to 3 years, spending all of the savings that we have. So this was presented to us, and you can see that there were 33 full-time employees that needed to be reduced to prepare the budget just for the Budget Committee. And so 1 month later, along with the other counselors, we adopted this supplemental budget that eliminated these 33 positions. In April, the city manager presented their proposed fiscal year 2025 budget, reducing more than $4.1 million in costs, along with multiple positions from the library and police, and impacting youth services and elders. These are services supported by the general fund. It was really hard for us, I want to tell you. It was very hard. And this was our starting place. Next slide, thank you. So here we have the fiscal year 2025 proposed reductions when they were brought to us. And again, I'll just say that it was really hard. There was more than 10 permanent positions and support to key services totaling the $4.3 million. Next slide. Thank you. So we were able to restore some services, and the February budget reductions of the proposed budget, the Budget Committee got to work with what we could do. And as you know, and you heard again tonight, there was a tremendous outpouring for the library, to keeping the library open with the hours that we had already reduced. We also heard support for the parks, Center 50 Plus, and the graffiti abatement position. As a committee, we struggled with the reductions to the programs that supported children and families, like the splash pads, the free movie nights, and the concerts. There was many testimonies of how this was very important to the community. And so here we were trying to struggle with how do we support the community with these services, but yet at the same time still balance our budget. What we were able to do, it was like a lifeline thrown for us. We restored what we saw as core services to those communities using one-time funding, and this will only protect them for 1 year. And this was the library, the graffiti abatement team, and part of the parks and concerts and movies. So what we had at the end was the recommended reductions, and that still was a total of $1.8 million. And it was reductions to part of Center 50, part of the recreation programs, park operations, youth development, and vulnerable community members for the youth. While I felt good about this process, I did not like the task that we were faced with. We worked very hard, and we had a lot of difficult conversations with a great deal of respect for hearing all opinions. While this is not a budget that I choose, but it is a budget that is responsive to our task and a balanced budget. So the next steps are the City Council will receive what the Budget Committee had approved, and we will discuss it again. And I wanted to share this with you and the outcome of the work that we did. The Revenue Task Force is now working to prevent future reductions. And while we're working to recommend a balanced budget, there is another group of people who have volunteered to ensure that we don't have to continue to make this budget reductions year after year, and that's you. And I want to again thank you for that work. I do want to leave you with one comment that was made by a Budget Committee member who I felt was very good in making a statement that was the sentiment of the majority of the Budget Committee, and it goes, to solve a problem, you must first acknowledge you have one. I have been disheartened to read the accounts of citizens who say Salem doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. Or, as others have said, a priorities problem. I have reviewed the financial forecasts, and while the trend line might not be a black diamond slope, it is an incredibly steep slope nonetheless. New revenue must be found in order to provide the services that our community wants and deserves. Any questions?
Bill Smaldone. Councilor, thank you very much for coming down. I'd like to know if among these various cuts that you describe, is the navigation center that the city just built included in those cuts?
So you may want to answer this, but we have excluded some of the funding for that because they have been able to garner other funds.
Okay, so they're partially funded from the outside.
Yes.
But these other cuts to the homelessness program, such as the outreach team, those are very deep. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to answer any? It looks like we don't have any others. I was very nervous, I'm sorry.
Great job, Linda. This is a tough crowd. No, you all have been great. Okay, I'm going to get this kicked off this evening through the first half of the session, but I wanted to check really quickly because we have an update to the agenda. So my understanding is that we're going to start the discussion about the personal income tax when we get to agenda item number 7. So we're going to go through kind of the next little chunk of items, and then when we get to that, we'll do that focused discussion of the personal income tax versus starting that discussion right now. Is that also everyone else's understanding? I see head nods. Bill?
Yeah, Bill Rickey. I would suggest maybe we start that right now. If we have time left over, we can get to your agenda item. So I think we have a lot to discuss.
Yeah, we do. And that's a great point. So for everyone's knowledge, my plan was to go through where we are now and kind of the shift, talk about what ultimately would end up in a recommendation packet, and then the agenda for the upcoming meetings, and then have a discussion kind of about what it looks like for this next couple of meetings. So if we wanted to save that until the end, we can adapt. Beth Vargas, I saw your hand first.
Beth Vargas, and I agree with Bill.
Great. I saw Keith's hand, and then
Before
Scott.
we continue discussion, so we have a motion from Bill. And could you restate the motion, please?
My motion is that we start discussion right now and move the agenda item number 6 to the end of this.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Go ahead.
So I agree there's a lot to discuss about the various options, and in particular the particular one we want to dedicate some time to. However, I think knowing exactly what it is that we're driving to would be beneficial to that discussion, right? So having a check-in on what the process is and what the final outcome of that discussion is aimed to be could be very beneficial to making it an actually efficient discussion, as opposed to one where we're just going to go around and around for a while.
Okay, further discussion?
Scott?
Scott?
I believe with Bill's motion, there was discussion regarding talking about Russ's personal income tax plan. So I do think there is some roadmap as far as what we would be discussing.
Yeah, I would also like to add that I don't know that, I agree with everything you're saying in terms of want to know the process so that we have something to present that's, I guess, tangible, right, that makes sense to all of us. But I think we're a ways away from that. I think we're still battling this 1 or 2 more meetings, right, 2 more meetings. I think in some of our minds, we're still thinking that that's going to happen. I don't know that we are. We spent the last several meetings 2.5 hours, or so, and then getting 15 minutes at the end to actually discuss something, I think we're behind.
I don't disagree with that, but I think having a sense of what's the document we're actually going to produce and getting a better understanding of what we all can expect to see in that document will help us determine what our discussion should be focused on. And my guess is we all have a slightly different vision on what our final outcome is going to be. And not even in terms of the content, but in terms of the structure and the style and the approach of it.
Further discussion on the motion on the floor? Scott?
I would maybe, collaborating with Bill on the motion, why don't we say we limit discussion on process check-in to 20 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I would want to remind everyone that this is our task force, so we can tell the city how they're going to receive what we put together, right? I think that's very important.
So what I heard there is Scott made a friendly amendment to the motion to limit the discussion of process check to 20 minutes. And Bill, you accepted that friendly motion to change your motion to limit it to 20 minutes? Is that what we just decided? Okay. So that is the motion on the floor. Any further discussion for it? And any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? It's okay to be opposed. The ayes have it. Nay, there we go. The ayes have it.
All right, start your engines. Oh my gosh, it's going to take me 20 minutes to get to the next slide. Here we go. Okay, we're here. This is the agenda. We have done our budget committee update. Check. Process check, we're just connecting on where we are right now. So roles and responsibilities, these are pulled directly from the charter. We reviewed these last time. So reviewing the city's current financial situation, considering revenue options, recommending options to city council for further exploration and potential adoption, participating in good faith. So we're all expected to participate constructively as demonstrated here tonight with a shared goal of identifying potential revenue sources. Oh, I think I got my arrows figured out. It's these ones, not these ones. Okay, so correct. We are in our 5th task force meeting. So as you all already recognize, we're in a shift. So we have spent a lot of time doing a ton of learning, a ton of outreach to the community to understand priorities, to understand what's feasible, and to hear from people about their perspectives on the current situation, different pathways, different scenarios. There's been a lot of language around kind of what we are going for. And we wanted to make sure that that was really intentional and different from last time, right? That we are connecting and hearing from folks from across the community about their perspectives on the City of Salem's revenue options, what we're all going for, and kind of what is going to be feasible to recommend in a packet going forward. And this meeting is where we start to shift, right? So this is where we start to shift and dive into feasible revenue options. This is where we have those discussions about what that looks like, start to envision what is ultimately going to go into a packet. We'll do that this meeting, the next meeting, and then work on kind of finalizing what that packet is going to look like, those contents, work together kind of with you all before that gets presented to council in July. All right, so first topic of the evening, thinking about what goes into the recommendation packet. So through the course of our discussions in these meetings and the feedback that we have heard from you all, this is an overview of some of what we heard from you about being relevant to include in a packet, right? So when we think about what goes to council, the recommendation options would include a set. So really clear here, not just one, but a set of feasible revenue options to meet near and also long-term projected revenue needs. The second one that we heard as being relevant would be a recommendation about the services that council should prioritize. So those are ones where we heard a lot about a lot of focus and prioritization around the value of the library. That has been something that's been heard pretty consistently from the community. We also heard a couple of other service priorities through the community survey and then also town halls. So putting that together into the packet seems like it would be important as part of the discussion and part of the deliberations of what has come together for the Revenue Task Force. Becky, I see your hand up. Yes.
Becky Beeman. So the business of the pathways, the this only, that only, this only, that only, or option 6, all of the above plus more.
Yeah.
It's not about prioritizing that and
Exact-
saying option 3 is preferred.
Correct.
Okay, it's just individual services that we heard.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
In that contextual piece that we will be sharing on the revenue.
Right. That would be the next one. But continuing the list on the left, the next one would be that policy memo. So I wanted to flag some language updates. Initially, when we talked about what would go on, or discussions around this have been about a legislative agenda. Through the conversations that we've had, ultimately what would go into a legislative agenda aren't necessarily legislative items. So things like intergovernmental agreements or intergovernmental entities, things that might be a little bit longer horizon or require the agreement of somebody else, really would kind of get put into some long-term options to pursue. We don't want to forget those, but aren't necessarily legislative items. So we updated the language and are thinking of calling it a policy memo. Obviously up for debate as to exactly what that's called, but the context there is that's what that section of the recommendation packet would include. Then we get into the right-hand side. Wow, you all got front row view into my challenges with lefts and rights. So on the right-hand side, that contextual information, this is where, Becky, we were talking about including what revenue pathways, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of the above, could be achieved with the options that are selected. So the framework here really is thinking about, first, identifying feasible options to propose, and then seeing how that matches with the different pathways. What could we achieve? What could we go for? Where might we fall short? But using the options as the driver in this situation, and then bringing in that contextual information about the pathways. And then, of course, including all of that community feedback. So when you're thinking about presenting this to council, just in case 1 or 2 council members, definitely not Councilmember Nishioka, in case they haven't tuned in for all of the task force meetings, they have all of that community input in the packet all together, able to kind of reference that and kind of recall and then do some study of the recommendations that come from the task force. So I know we wanted to limit the discussion to about 20 minutes. So this is a preliminary understanding kind of what we heard about the pieces that make sense to include in a packet, but want to hear from you all. I think, Keith, you brought up a really great point about let's make sure that this is in general, the pieces that we want to include, what we want to build content around, the questions that we want to have answered when we're putting together the packet. So I'll pause there and open the floor for discussion. Becky, I saw your hand.
Becky Beeman, I don't know where the information about restrictions, like don't go for the low-income people if you're doing this option or that kind of stuff. I don't know where that goes. And wording is extremely important, and engagement with the community between the time we make the recommendation and the time it actually gets onto a ballot. How to explain this to the community is going to be key, and I don't know if you want the committee to do this or the task force or what.
Becky, is it fair to say that it would be relevant to include that decision-making criteria that we agreed to in terms of priority when you're talking about restrictions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Beth.
Beth Vargas Duncan. I would prefer on the policy memo that it feels to me, and maybe this is just because I'm a legislative person, that we're diluting the impact of directing really or recommending to the city that they pursue legislatively changes to state law so that the city of Salem gets funding reimbursed for the property that we do not collect tax upon, that government resides on.
Great, got it.
Would you be suggesting a second policy memo for everything else?
Again, Beth Vargas Duncan, no, I would be suggesting legislative recommendations that the city pursue.
Yeah, Keith.
So I think my question is on the set of feasible revenue options, and kind of what that could look like, right? So I'm envisioning there could be multiple sets of revenue options, right? And so we could present a package that says, here's how we deliberated, here's how we came to these conclusions, the criteria we used, and then our recommendations could be a set of option A, that is the income tax. It could be a set of option B, that is these other elements, and then option C, right? That has multiple packages together that could produce kind of the revenue target that we're at there, right? So not necessarily just a list of here are all of the feasible revenue options that are out there, right? That we've already deliberated and gone over. That would be the whole list that we currently have in our packet, but more of a high-graded set of options that could produce the outcomes that we're after for the city. And I guess my thought in there in terms of the recommendations about which services to prioritize is that those would be included in those options, right? So it would be, here's an operations fee, right? We recommend an operations fee targeted toward a specific thing, or a pursuit of a new levy, local option levy targeted toward a particular outlet, right? That's included, because to me that plays into the feasibility of a particular outcome. In terms of the political feasibility of that actually being implemented and passed, right? So I see that as being an integrated element into at least some of the options in some of those packages.
Okay, I saw Bill's hand, and then Russ, I saw your hand next.
Thank you. Bill Smaldone. So I guess following up Keith's point, it seems to me that we might have various options, ABC, but we're going to have some kind of two-stage approach, right? So we're going to have to be able to express what we think should be done in the near term, right, to deal with the immediate crisis to the general fund, and then in the long term. And I think we have to always remember that when we're crafting this, the council is going to make the kinds of changes it wants on its own. Right? We can only recommend. So our recommendations ought to be as sort of flexible and illustrative as possible.
Russ.
Bill pretty much stole my thunder, but I think as a task force, we have to admit we have a short-term and a long-term problem, and probably no one revenue source can solve them both. I think it's a given we are going to give a package of recommendations.
Yeah, he brought his mind reading hat today. Great. Raquel.
Thank you, Raquel Moore Green. I'd like to go back to the policy memo and follow up on what Beth had to say, because within those items, one of the recommendations was to take advantage of ORS 190.110, which is the interlocal agreements. That doesn't take anything except for city staff sitting down and outlining what those services could be and approaching the state. So here again, that's something that can parallel everything and doesn't need to necessarily wait if indeed that is the pleasure of council. Thank you.
Great point. Thank you. Okay. All right. Any other questions about kind of what ultimately would end up in a packet, or anything else that we wanted to discuss together as a group? Okay.
So.
Oh, yeah, Keith, go ahead.
I think Becky brought up kind of a question and that hasn't totally been answered about the wording and how is it being written, who's wording, who's approved, because I think some of that becomes fairly important, particularly on the political element of it and the interpretation of the data, right? So I think what's the process of actually writing this document and recommendation and putting it forward?
Raquel.
And thank you, Raquel Moore Green. If I could follow up on that also, who is making the presentation to council? Thank you.
Okay. Sean, did I see a hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what we've heard. I've always liked legislative action items, just because it implies action there. And it's good that we're moving on here. I mean, I can see that everybody really wants to get moving quickly on this, and I really appreciate that. We're all volunteers here. Our city councilors are all volunteers, and it's good. It's time for us to kind of step up and take the leadership necessary to move forward on this. From my point of view, we're trying to do three things: a legislative recommendation, action list, action item list. We need some that's one thing. A second thing is some larger revenue ideas that we're going to put forth to the city council. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is smaller things that will fill the gap in between when those can come due. And to give you guys an example, if we passed the greatest income tax we could ever come up with tonight, the city council isn't going to get it onto a ballot this year. It'll probably be like next year. And then it would be for the tax year of 2026 or 2027. Right? There is a big gap between whatever we do that's big, that raises a lot of money, and how long it's actually going to take before it becomes law. So we do need to have a fire underneath us to get that process started. That's where our leadership comes in. So I'm all for moving forward. And we have 6 minutes and 12 seconds left to continue to discuss this.
And Sean is presenting to council, right?
Yes. Yeah, the chair of the task force would present the recommendation packet to council. Raquel?
Along with the co-chair, Raquel Moore Green, along with the co-chair.
I think that is a question that I have for the city. We'll get back to
I
you.
would just say, I'd like to remind that this is our task force. So if we say that the co-chair presents, then the co-chair presents, right? I don't know that we need to overthink it that much, but this is our deal. We volunteer the time and put together recommendations. So if we send two people to present, then two people present.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We just want to make sure that we check it against all the rules and what's, dot I's, cross T's. All right, so we'll see you all there. Just kidding, Keith.
But back to the presentation, great, but like, how is it being put together, and what is that approval process and finalization process looking like? And I see that we have that right as finalizing it on the last meeting here, but I guess is that finalization of the whole packet, or is that in the wordsmithing that's involved in that? Kind of what's the level of detail there? Is there, to Sean's point of committee showing leadership, right, are there subcommittees that should be developed to pursue one of, each of those three different elements that that you talked about, right? What's the nuts and bolts of that?
Yeah, so I'll go through the agenda for the next items, and then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Annie Rose to talk about those exact things in terms of the review process and the wordsmithing and some of those items as well. So the goal for the meeting today is really to start focusing in on that feasible set so we don't end up with a laundry list of every single revenue option that has ever been thought of. And then in the next meeting, really think about and debate and clarify and refine those options. And this is where we would, in between kind of now and then, we know it's a little bit short timing, but potentially send out a different additional survey information, get feedback from you all so that we can keep things moving forward and make sure that we're able to get people's feedback in the meantime. So it's not kind of restricted just to the times that we get to join each other. And then at that point, right, thinking about the amount of stuff that we're able to get through today, and then in the next meeting, be able to provide to you all a draft of the packet. So the vision is that we would put that together similar to how we had put together all of the content for today, but also similar to this, invite you all to review, refine, provide feedback throughout the process so that it is ultimately a packet that is reflective of the recommendations, the deliberations, the thought, the sentiment, and the feeling of the task force. I think, Bill, you said it a couple times. This is your task force. You're absolutely right. So we'd love to continue facilitating that for you, but are absolutely interested in you all feeling represented in ultimately what ends up in the packet. Annie Rose, anything else that you would add?
The only other thing that I wanted to add to that was it really depends on what we're able to get through tonight. We have so many of these medium interest options that we need to get off of the table so that you can have the time that you need to discuss these high interest options. And ideally, we want to be starting a lot of that discussion this evening and then fully, having everything out on the table in the June 4th meeting so that we can bring you a draft to the June 26th meeting for revisions and edits. So that's the intention, but that's also kind of up to this group in terms of how much we're able to get through in the conversation and discussion tonight.
Okay, that being said, I think we probably have, 5 minutes, 4 minutes?
2 minutes, 24 seconds.
Ooh, okay. We might need a couple minutes. So the next, we just have one discussion item left. When we think about moving forward with deliberating, with refining, with building the recommendations, putting together feasible options, ultimately that would end up in a packet, just a discussion question. We wanted to create a space as we are shifting from a lot of learning, a lot of community engagement and outreach into a lot more conversation with each other, a lot more refinement and deliberations. People's perspectives are going to get brought to the table when they think about how to build and structure these recommendations. So the question for you all is, given that we're halfway through the process, we're in this shift, is there anything that you need from each other or from the city or from us as facilitators to successfully complete the remaining work other than expedited time, getting through some of the housekeeping things at the beginning? Becky, I see your hand up, but I'm actually going to kick the conversation off with Chair Nickus. And then, yes, you're up next.
The conversation of other things that we need from Moss Adams to continue to facilitate the meeting? Is that your question?
From when moving forward into the deliberation session, is there anything that we want to bring to the table in terms of what we need from each other, the city, or facilitators to complete the work?
I have specific questions that I think the expertise of the city attorney could help with, but beyond that, I don't have anything specific. We seem to be ready to go, so I don't really feel like I need a lot of other outside help. Does anyone else?
Great. I saw Becky, your hand next.
I'd like to consider this question after we kick a bunch of stuff off our agenda.
Awesome. Bill?
Just the kind of questions we're going to have, are going to be concrete questions. Sorry. Bill Smaldon. I think the kind of questions we're going to have, the things we're going to ask of staff are going to be like concrete things, informational kinds of things. And that's what we need to move into the discussion to get to.
Great. Okay. I think we hit the timing right on. So we're going to blaze forward.
All right, nice to see you all this evening. I'm Annie Rose Favreau. I am going to take us through to the revenue deliberation topic, and as requested, we are going to start with the high interest options so that we can discuss the income tax. So we'll come back to all of the medium range options, but the first thing to provide some context to kick you all off in this conversation. We've put together this table. I know it is very difficult to read on the slide, but these are all of the high interest options that have been identified up to this point in time. What we've done here is that we've included potential revenue as well as a table with the decision criteria selected from this group and how well each of these options align with that criteria. We also, on the farthest side, have community survey results and how well these options align with the feedback that we received through the community survey as a means of kind of at a glance being able to look at how well aligned each of these options are. There's some context that I'd like to share on some of the other options that are not related to the personal income tax. One thing I did want to note here.
Please. I'm sorry, I'm confused. Aren't we moving straight into income tax discussion?
Yes,
and our 20
and I'm
minutes has
getting
expired.
Context for you here. So
this is the context for the income tax discussion?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So on this list, what you'll see here is the personal income tax, which is the original one that was on our list of 41 options, number 25. This is a straightforward personal income tax. So this is the option where if the city just wanted to put in place an income tax, that's what this option describes. The only other piece of context that I will share before turning it over to you all is that in terms of whatever we call this, or separate this out into a legislative agenda and other policy considerations or what have you, We do have this list of other potential options that have come up in conversation here, and we would say that if you were interested in exploring a much broader conversation around general tax reform or restructuring, which would certainly be a much longer term item than something like just establishing a personal income tax, we would recommend that it might be better suited for this area because it would have that much longer timeline associated with it. So I don't know if that's how this group will want to consider two sides of that equation, but that is how we have it presented here. So with that, I will turn it back over to you all to discuss what you need to on this topic.
Are we starting off by hearing from Russ then on this high interest tax option? Scott?
I just wanted to make a quick motion before we jump into the personal income tax discussion, referring to the table that's shown on this projector. Given the unclear or likely no legal viability of the corporate income tax and the property tax on vehicles, I would like to make a motion for a vote on striking those options from consideration.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Any discussion on that?
Up here. Becky Beeman. I have absolutely no problem with getting rid of the property tax on vehicles. The corporate income tax, I don't know enough about, and why we think it would be legally not legally viable. I also don't know why the property tax on vehicles is not legally viable, but I think we have a tendency to default to that position when we don't know the answer. So I say get rid of the property tax on vehicles, but keep the corporate income tax around so we can get more information on it.
Drat. Okay. Bill Smaldone, I'm wondering if the maker of the motion would be willing to add the property tax, that is the last item on the list there, to his motion. My reason being that if you look at the various attributes of that option, it generates no ongoing revenue for the general fund. So I don't know why we would discuss it.
I just realized I've neglected to announce my name every time I've spoken, so I apologize for that misstep. Yes, I would accept the motion, and I would propose, given Becky's amendment, excuse me, I would propose keeping the corporate income tax on the list of considerations pending further information on its legal viability, and then accept Mr. Smaldone's recommendation to remove option A1.
Okay, so we have a motion with two amendments. Would you read the motion as it exists now, Scott?
Scott Cantonwine. As I understand it, following the amendments, my motion would be to remove the property tax on vehicles identified as line number 26 and the annex developed areas within the urban growth boundary identified as option A1 from consideration.
Is there any discussion on this motion to remove 26 and A1? TJ?
Yeah, TJ Sullivan. The only thing I would say is the annex developed area. I don't understand how that's a negative. But every time that I was on council when we looked at this, it was always a net positive. So I don't know how all of a sudden it's turned into a net negative, but.
Levi Herrera Lopez. I guess I really want to get to the main conversation, so we've already spent a couple of minutes on that, on this other motion. So I'm personally going to vote no on this motion just because we said we wanted to get to the income tax, and we've already taken a few minutes on something else.
Okay, so we have a motion then to table this motion for the moment, not for the whole meeting, but for the moment.
Sounded more like a call for a vote to me.
The tabling motion calls for a vote. It stops further consideration of the current motion because it's been motioned to table. And if that motion fails, then Then we go back to discussion. Is there a second? To
Second.
tabling this? The second twice by Ray and Keith. All in favor of tabling the current motion to take 26 and A1 off of consideration, say aye. Does everyone understand? Sorry.
Yes.
So we're currently voting on whether or not we're going to table this for later tonight and go straight to the discussion of the income tax.
Point of order.
Right.
Stephen Jenkins. I believe under Robert's Rules of Order, when you table something, it's permanently tabled unless somebody votes to bring it back to the table. So it's not.
That's why I said we're tabling until later tonight.
I just want to be
Maybe
clear
not the
that,
right word, I don't know.
I just want to be clear that it's not tabled until later tonight. It's tabled until somebody votes to bring it back.
Takes it back
So
off
I
the
just
table.
want to make
You are
sure we're
correct.
clear about our process.
Yeah, you are correct. So it's tabled until someone takes it off the table, which someone can do tonight. Okay. But all in favor of tabling it, say aye again, please. Sorry. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
I would say the nays have it. So the nays have it.
So now we're going to vote.
Now we vote on removing 26 and A1, or we go back to further discussion. Is actually what we do now.
Is it
28.
Is it 28? The last two? 28, okay, sorry, 28 and A1. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none?
I'd like to hear more from TJ on this, with experience on this, how it used to be positive, now all of a sudden it's negative.
Yeah, I don't, I mean, I haven't done the math, but we are talking about a whole lot of people that get to use City of Salem services, and they get to pay absolutely nothing for it. And that to me is just fundamentally unfair, that we're picking up the tab for people who get to use our streets, our parks, our fire, our police, and they pay nothing for it. And so this is just a way of making sure that people are picking up the tab.
And if I may step in there, we did run an analysis in the current setup on this topic, and that's been provided to this group. There's a deep dive on this topic itself that goes through the math of how we got to those numbers too. So we do have additional information that is available to this group, has been shared, but we can certainly come back to that as well.
And Becky Beeman, and as I understand it, it boils down to the other people who provide services to the unincorporated area will no longer provide those services, and they will expect the same level of service from the city that the other people are, and that's where the costs come in.
Right. TJ Sullivan, I understand that part. I just still think that the level of, we're still providing services now to them and not collecting anything for it. And like I said, that to me is just fundamentally wrong.
Okay, any further discussion? Then we move to a vote to remove item 28 and item A1. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
It sounded like the ayes have it, but I voted aye, so it's hard for me to hear for sure. We'll do it one more time. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All in favor, all against, say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it.
Bill Rickey, make a motion that in high interest options for discussion is the sale of surplus property for the city. Yep. I asked that in the high interest option discussion, we add the sale of surplus property. I believe that's both real property and equipment. Yeah, but I was asking that it be put on the high interest option.
If I may step in as a point of process, there are, if you would like as a group, we can go through all of the other options, and that's the exact question that we have, which is, are there any options of the medium interest that you would like to move to the high interest list so that you have a comprehensive understanding of what all the high interest options might be? So if that's of interest to the group, we can certainly do that.
These motions are fine things, but these are, like, the first one and this motion are both motions to change the agenda. Right, so you guys understand that was the process we're going through, and we've already changed it once. Do you want to continue changing the agenda to draw things up? Is that what the group wants to do, or?
Bill Smaldon, I suggest we move into the discussion of the income tax now. These other items are also items we can discuss at a later time when we're talking about the need to plug various gaps.
Okay, there is no motion on the floor, so without one, we'll move forward with the agenda. Does anyone wish to make one? Hearing none? Okay. I guess we'll move forward with the discussion of the income tax.
Well, I want to remind you all of what happened last meeting. I, being a messenger for a few others, but not very many, mostly for myself, dropped the little bomb of an income tax in here. And I got, in full transparency, I've got to say that my friend TJ Sullivan over there said, Russ, I expected to be the whipping boy of this task force, and I'm really pleased you took that job from me. So anyway, as you may recall, I offered to work with anybody that wanted to talk about it in terms of tweaking the numbers. I remind you again, the numbers we gave you last time were totally hypothetical, somewhere between hypothetical and ridiculous, and that the point was a structure that allowed a progressive income tax to be considered. Again, there's nothing magic about the particular structure that was presented, other than the fact that it's very consistent with the data from the State Department of Revenue on income tax filings, so it makes it very easy to project numbers. Now, I also, in offering to talk to anybody that wanted to talk about it, Tom Hoffert contacted me, Executive Director of the Chamber, and reached out and invited me to participate on a panel that discusses that. And that panel included, and they have given me permission to cite them in here, right here. You're all in the room: Scott Cantonwine, Bill Reike, Raquel Moore Green, TJ Sullivan, and David Reinhold. Okay, I appeared at a forum to discuss and invited me to appear with them on a forum, which I was pleased to do. And the result of that ended up this group agreeing to personally fill in their own numbers on an income tax structure, the structure that we had talked about. Again, that's nothing magic. The structure can be changed. The revenue results probably would be very little different. And so I invited them to give me their individual assessments, which they agreed to do. I averaged those, put them through the income tax model, and I'd like to let you know what they came up with. Again, the categories: $0 to $70,000 income, 70 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200,000 a year, 200 to 500, and over 500. And again, we had complete data from the state as to the results of such filings for 2021. Last year that full data is available. These numbers are not magic, but I'm going to read to you the results of their composite estimates. Again, we agreed that these estimates would be what they felt would be reasonable in their own opinion, and what they felt would be reasonable for the public in this area. And here are the results. The 0 to 70, 0.15 of 1%. 70 to $100,000, 0.43%, like 0.4 of 1%. 100 to 150, 0.875%. So the 100 to 150 includes the rate that was the flat rate suggested on the payroll tax, for whatever that's worth to you. 150 to 200,000, 1.09%. 200 to 500, 1.68%, and 500 and over, 2%. Now, I'd ask you just think about that. Those sounds like pretty reasonable numbers, absolute, progressive, of course. The bottom line of the estimate revenue that generated, and it would be more today because this is 4 years ago, $41,452,848. I think there was a 13 cents on there, but I felt free to round it, okay? And again, I thank these people. I thank Tom Hoffert for inviting me to do that. Again, I've had other people come and want to talk about it in general, but this was a request that resulted in the most specific dollar estimates for your consideration. I'm going to, again, thank these people for doing that, and any of the 5 of you who would like to add anything, feel free. I am a messenger here, so not, I'm going to edit it no further.
Becky Beeman, I forget, if we pursued option 6, which is everything in the kitchen sink, what was the shortfall in the near part?
I believe it was 55 million.
55. So we're in the
for everything. I don't believe that includes, potential additional items.
So I'm thinking about the illustrative purpose of the examples that Russ just laid out, because you can plug whatever numbers you like right into that schedule and raise or lower the total amount. The other thing that comes to mind, the opportunity that seems to come forward with this kind of a proposal, is that we could simultaneously give people something back, right? We could reform the tax structure, get rid of the regressive taxes the regressive fees that many of us have to pay, all of us have to pay in the city, and make up for the lost revenue that getting rid of those fees would cause with additional money from the income tax. So this gets at the issue of not just thinking about this as an additional tax, but as a reform of a system that is, by and large, I think we all have come to recognize, utterly regressive. So it's a real opportunity that we could put forward to the council.
I just would add that that was one of the things that we as a group talked about, was looking at other things that we could take off in exchange for creating a new tax system.
So I think, right, math is fun, and you can make the numbers say what you want, right? And that's great. Those numbers look awesome. I think my question is, and Bill, you're right? There's an opportunity there for tax reform. I think my question is what's the timeline that we think that implementation is, and specifically the timeline to get that to be a politically feasible option, right? In terms of tax reform, like that's a big package of changes that have to be made, at least at the city level, perhaps at the state level, right? If you're talking, and that kind of gets back to a previous point about putting it on the legislative option. And so I guess the numbers look great, right? Sure, another $41 million of revenue would be awesome. I don't know that I would categorize this right now as a feasible option for us to present as an actual recommendation that the city council can move forward with right now. I think it is absolutely something to keep in mind as an option, right, for the city to consider, to think about, consider how to build the political capital and the support for such a measure, because it's a big, bold idea, and it's a good idea. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure I see it as feasible at this point.
Ray Corsenberry. Actually, to get at that question, I was going to say something else, but I think it is feasible. I think we've been talking about this as a long-term option and coming up with a package of something to fill in the gap for the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, until this can get on the ballot and get the voters' approval. And we'll have a lot of work to do to make sure they approve this. But I wanted to mention, as someone who was on the task force 6 years ago, where we cobbled together various fees, including what you now get on your water bill, and it didn't work. We're back in this situation where we need to come up with more revenue. So the idea of a bold new idea to reform the system, I think is great. I think it's long overdue, and I think we need to get heading in that direction.
Just as a point of information, not supporting, not opposing the proposed income tax, we've talked at length about the administrative complexity, the length of time to implement this. I would just point out as an example, the Metro jurisdiction in May of 2020, they voted in the supportive homeless services tax. And that was placed into effect in 2021. So I do think that length of time is potentially shorter than we're envisioning or being told it might be.
Yeah, Bill Rickey, I do think to Keith's point, though, it may make sense to have an option that's a Band-Aid, right, that gets us through to implementation of this. And I think everyone has had that. One further point, in these meetings that we've all had together, I think all of you are very intelligent people and probably have some ideas of your own. Please don't be afraid, because Russ now is the whipping boy for his idea to come up with your own. There may be some really good alternative revenue ideas out there that maybe you were bashful about bringing forward. But, Russ and the handful that got together prior to the last meeting, brought something forward that seems to have gained some traction here in terms of interest from all of us, not just the 40-some options that the city and Moss Adams presented to us. There's probably some outside-the-box stuff out there that make a whole heck of a lot of sense that we're just not aware of.
I think it's worth mentioning, and this is kind of stuff from last time's presentation that Russ made that hasn't been mentioned today. This would be 2 years from the time it passed by the voters. So we're looking at 3+ years. So we're looking at a 3-year interim, and we know that. And in terms of implementation, in terms of the numbers, I can go look at last year's Oregon filing and see what my number's going to be, because it's like, was it line 7 on Oregon's taxes, Russ? So it's not really complex. It's like, take that number, multiply it by what your income group is, and there you are. So yeah, we're going to have to figure out how that all works in terms of the actual process. But I don't think it's that administratively complex if we don't add in a whole bunch of loopholes.
Can I add one point of clarification on some of the timeline pieces here as well? You'll see on the high interest table, we included for personal income tax a 2+ year, and that's for a simple personal income tax. It would be administratively quite high, and so that would be the earliest. 2+ years is, and I think that 3-year, that would be by far the very earliest that something like that could be potentially come into play, and that does not take into account political considerations if it was a broader topic beyond a more straightforward, if you're really looking at some of those longer term reform and restructuring options. So if the group is interested in gathering a more clear estimate from city staff around how long either a simple or more complex version of this is, that's something we could certainly bring to the next meeting as well.
It seems that with the short-term options, if we put that into the package as far as these are our Band-Aids, and then those Band-Aids can be removed if and when the personal income tax is, that seems like a way to propose it, so that we very clearly state, yes, we understand there's a problem right now, and these are our right now solutions. But 3-4 years down the line, all these extra fees will be erased to make it more palatable for the voters.
I think Becky's next.
Becky Beeman, I don't see what makes it so complex. We're talking about a little bit of reform, and you're taking that as meaning it's real complex. We're talking about dropping some fees. It doesn't look all that complex to me. It feels like we don't like it because it's your idea.
Bill Rickey, I'm sorry if I skipped ahead here. Let's talk about how we got here. So last July, City Council has a meeting that they're going to implement a payroll tax. By November, that was on the ballot, and people voted on it. And I would remind everyone that both the mayor and a sitting city councilor knew that was a strategic failure. They both called it that at a meeting I was at. So they spent a little over $200,000 on that campaign to get that on the ballot, but it didn't take 2 years, 3 years to implement that. The city and the mayor and the city councilors wanted the payroll tax. They voted on it at a meeting in July. Then there was an uproar to get on the ballot, and it's on the ballot in November. So if we wanted to present this and we wanted the community to vote on it, I don't know why we couldn't use the same resources, with the exception of maybe spending $200,000 or more that we didn't need to on a strategic failure. Maybe we couldn't get that on the ballot as well.
For clarity as well, administrative complexity in this context, we're referencing the complexity to actually administer the tax on an ongoing basis, nothing to do with actually getting the tax up to vote. So just for context.
Levy and Scott.
There we go. Levy Herrera Lopez. I just want to say for me, the way I'm looking at it is we have a long-term problem that if a solution that we implement that's going to work, or that we think it's going to work, and we structure it in a way that hopefully works, is if it takes 2 or 3 years, I'm okay with that, because if we don't do it, there'll be another task force in 5 or 6 years. And I'm sorry, but one of our biggest problems as a community in Salem is that we don't think long-term. We think Band-Aids, and that's keeps getting us into trouble.
Scott Cantonwine, not to belabor this point, but we've again in this conversation heard the 2 to 3 year administrative complexity timeline, and I would again point to our neighbors at Metro who, for sake of comparison, their tax was on tonight's election in 2020. They had it effective in the tax year beginning the following January 2021. That's, by my math, less than 12 months. So my takeaway from this is maybe it would be worthwhile, worthwhile for city staff to collaborate with folks at Metro to understand how did they get from May 2020 ballot to January 2021 effective. That's less than two or 3 years. So there may be some information to be gained there.
Ray in the back there, and then Keith.
Yeah, Ray Corsenberry. Yeah, those are all good questions. I understand, though, that I could be wrong on this, but I thought that the school board was thinking about putting something on the ballot for November as well to raise some revenue, because I know they're hurting pretty bad. So I don't know if again, it's a political decision to make. The city council will have to make it, and they may be reluctant to go up and actually have this on the ballot as well in November. So that's something I guess it's not really our job to make that decision, but it is something to think about, and that's why we've been talking about short-term ideas as well. So anyway.
Keith?
Yeah. Well, I think, sorry, I started thinking about Ray's comments and forgot what I was going to say. But I think to the point of getting it on the ballot, absolutely, we could move it on the ballot, which would be another strategic failure, right? That is not going to work. And so that is I don't think we have, right, the data we have shows that the community approval of this funding type is 36%, right? Like that's that's nowhere close to being supported by the public and being implemented in any sort of immediate fashion, right? And being so the timeline involved in that, I think, is where we need to consider the work of the city and of the community and of us in building support for that initiative, right? Over time, I think it's not something that's going to be feasible for us and for implementing and getting approval for in the next 5 years.
Go ahead, Bill.
Bill Smolden. I think we're all in agreement that there's a two-step process involved here. One is short-term solutions to the immediate problem. Second is long-term solution. What is best for the city in the long term? If we come to the decision that the income tax is the best decision for the city in the long term, regardless of what the popularity rate is, we need to bring that to the city council and let the politicians deal with the political issue of how to transmit their message to the people. Now, I want to also say something about that number. At the forums that I attended, the income tax was in the same box with the payroll tax. Okay, it was also, so it was presented in a sense as if it were just like a flat tax, right? And it was put next to the most unpopular tax, perhaps next to the sales tax that one could have imagined for the city, right? So it seems to me that that number is rather skewed. It's a number that appears without any educational work at all being done. Okay, and I think I speak from a number of people in this room. If this goes forward with the city council, I think many of us will be willing to work on it and bring it to the people, right? Especially if we have a bridge built between the city council, that is, and institutions like the Chamber of Commerce. I just want to say one thing, I just can't help myself. I've been arguing with TJ Sullivan about taxes for 20 years. And I think this is the first meeting where we are one, okay? We are in agreement, okay? As he just noted in his last comment. That tells us that we've come somewhere. So anyway, that's a political decision for the council. We have to make the best recommendation possible.
And one point of clarification, the community approval of funding type column that you see here is from the community survey itself rather than the town hall results. So that question was presented to that group differently. And so that's the response to overall the response rate around an income tax specifically.
Yeah. I just want to remind Bill that, as I always tell my wife, it's not arguing, it's lovingly discussing.
Bill and Keith.
I don't know if it's lovely to discuss, but Keith, I just wanted to let you know that I would not spend $200,000 of taxpayer money on strategic failure, so I don't want to be mentioned ever with something like that. When I heard the mayor and the city councilor say that, I was embarrassed for them.
If we could go back,
and I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Keith.
Well, so Sean, to Bill's point, right? I think there is value in both Bill's point. There is value in making sure that City Council is aware of this, right? Like I've said, the numbers are there, and so I think so we don't. I feel like we're making the same points we actually made at the last meeting in a lot of ways around this discussion, and so I think. In the interest of kind of moving forward and getting efficiency of our time, happy to make a motion that we, as part of our package of recommendations to the city council, that we recommend they explore options for implementing and generating public support for personal income tax as a long-term solution of tax reform.
I'm going to turn.
So, a motion on the floor. Is there a second for
it? Discussion to that? We'll start with Scott. He was up next.
I'm going to turn to my neighbor and suggest an amendment to the motion to start with creating a subcommittee to form a recommendation to council.
And I guess so my recommendation is that in our package, right, and kind of envisioning again that our package of recommendations has multiple options within it and multiple packages of options within it, that one of those recommendations is that they explore the option for implementing and generating public support for a personal income tax as a long-term solution of tax reform. And that being the extent of that recommendation.
If I may make it, before we move in to that full discussion, I'd like to hear the answer to Scott's earlier question as part of this discussion, because I'm interested if we're going to do this, what the answer would be as to how long it would actually take to implement these taxes. I think city staff actually had an answer for us on that.
I'm going to try to have an answer. Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. In relation to Metro, they actually contracted with the City of Portland to administer their tax. The City of Portland already has taxes in place. The structure was built. The staff were hired. So they were able to move very quickly. For Salem, none of that exists, which is why it has an extended timeline for implementation.
How long do you think it would take to implement? Assuming it passed on the ballot, now it's time to implement. How long do you think it would take?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think 2 years is reasonable. 2 years. Thank you. And just for everyone's clarity, so it only allows 3 mics to be on at once. So once you're done talking, if you can turn it off, then everyone else can turn theirs on.
So we have Bill and Raquel.
So in keeping with Keith's motion, I guess a couple of points of clarification. One, that it would be a progressive income tax, right? And there are two things I would like to ask of staff. One would be, and this is in connection with your comments, Scott, that Russ Beaton and Josh Eggleston and a representative of Moss Adams sit down and work out for this body 3 schedules, 3 progressive income tax schedules that we could discuss at our next meeting. Because as we move toward writing up our recommendation, right, we want to have good illustrative power, right, in our narrative. And coming back with those schedules, right, will allow us to organize our thoughts around those illustrations. What could be done? Second issue for staff is, could they come back with a number? What would be the total cost of stripping out the operations fee and the streetlight fee that everybody now pays?
Is that germane to the motion?
There is a motion.
There is a motion on the floor.
There is a motion on the floor. Yeah.
To clarify, since there's confusion, there's a motion, and then Scott, you made an amendment, and is that amendment now part of the motion?
No.
No. Okay, so restate what the motion on the floor is then.
The motion is that we include as our package, part of our package of recommendations, that the City Council explore options for implementing and generating public support for a personal income tax as a long-term solution of tax reform.
Motion made to the floor. Raquel.
Thank you, Sean. Raquel Moore Green. I have a couple of things that I want to say. And first I want, Josh, I have a question, and perhaps you can clarify this for me. So I've got my income tax. I'm filling out my income taxes for the state of Oregon, and on that line 7 is the amount that's going to be taxed. And somehow on the form now it says there's this additional tax that gets plugged in. It all gets processed by the state, and the state then distributes the money to the city, correct? maybe I'm oversimplifying or I don't understand the process.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So we've had conversations with the Department of Revenue, who administers income taxes, payroll taxes for the state. If we were to go that route, the implementation would likely be longer. Every time we've approached them with a question about payroll taxes, it's been 3+ years that they would need to administer an additional tax. So the 2 years is if we hired staff and administered it internally. But it's a longer timeline, actually, if we go with the state. We haven't had those conversations with the state. We would likely have to renew those discussions. I don't know what their answer would be.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. I think, well, I won't go down that road. Thank you.
Raquel, may I jump in with one follow-up on that same topic?
Yes, please.
This is directed to Josh Eggleston. I guess this could just be a simple yes or no question. Is it possible to contract with the city of Portland for administration of a prospective payroll tax, I'm sorry, not payroll tax, personal income tax in Salem?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. If I could give a little more than a yes or a no, I think it's possible. The setup here in Salem is very different. In Portland, they have the structure already in place. They have business license registrations. They have a return process. They would have to set that up here in Salem, but there is the potential that Portland could administer it for us.
Okay. I would now like the second part of what I wanted to say, back to what Bill was talking about as far as what the group would do. I want real sidebars on that. What taxes or fees would be sunsetted? I think it's really important because I think for people to understand, for the general public to understand, they hear tax, they think it's just right added on top. I think you almost start the proposition with, you know, we're removing these taxes and this is what we would like to do in place of it. So I just want that, I would want that really clear in anything that goes to council from this group. Thank you.
And Sean, if I could, sorry, who am I cutting off? Anybody?
Becky Beeman, I really think it's important that we flesh out an option before we task ourselves to write a communications plan to explain an option we haven't defined. Yeah. To kind of go back to what Bill was talking about, the 3 options, I'd like to see one that generates 75 million so that we can do the option 6 and get rid of, I mean, just it's a notional idea. Here's what you could do to get 75 million. I'd like to see one that's got no tax on the 0 to 70,000 group, or maybe 0 to 50,000, but somehow relieve the burden on the people who are trying to live hand to mouth. We need the package that says, in the long term, we want to do this, and in the short term, we want to do this. And then we want to say, task the city council, we recommend you guys figure out how to communicate this, but we've got to flesh it out. I don't think we should leave it up to the council to come up with kind of a range of options. We need to show them what's possible.
So if I can speak to my motion in response to that, right? The goal of the motion is to recognize that it's a massively complex tax reform question that we're not going to figure out in the next 6 hours that we have of meeting time, right? I mean, like that's, and to be able to discuss that and determine what that is, right? And so the goal there is to say, hey, city, hey, City Council, this is an option, right? This is something that we believe you should take a deep look at, that you should go through and exercise and figure out what those particular options are, what taxes could be pulled off, what does that tax reform that we're using to sell this, what does that look like, right?
We need the city to tell us what the impact is of removing a bunch of things. But it's kind of like the stopgap things we plug in that we haven't discussed or identified. Those are things that are going to go away. And so you can't really talk about what that's going to cost until you have the whole thing written. And we've got to get past the long-term item to talk about the short-term items, and then we can talk about the work that remains to be done on the whole thing. But we've got to start by deciding if we want to propose an income tax.
And that's what, so that's what my motion is doing, is proposing that long-term income tax as an option for the city to consider, so we can move past it in this discussion and get to that whole list of medium or other high-interest options and medium options to discuss, right? Otherwise, we're going to say, we don't have the information that's being requested, right?
I thought your motion was to ask city council to run a bunch of stuff and figure out how to sell it.
No, it was to ask them to explore options for implementing and generating public support for a personal income tax as a long-term solution of tax reform.
So you're putting it as the long-term piece of the package we want to recommend.
Correct. At least an option of a long-term piece of a package we want to recommend.
Can we just say that instead of all the sales stuff?
Kathy?
Kathy Knock. So I think that it is important that I'm hearing we're all in agreement that this is a really interesting option. But we were, in my opinion, tasked with saying to the council, these are the options you should look at, right? These have community support. We all represent a variety of people, and we're excited about this. But the devil's in the details, and that is one of the reasons I don't think we can get it on a November ballot, because everybody is leery about something they've never seen before. They didn't know what a payroll tax is. They don't know what this personal income tax is going to mean to them. And I don't see that in 5 months that you could convince anyone or that they would believe us that these other taxes are going to go away. Because I also think, and someone, maybe the city attorney can tell me, I think there's some rules about putting things together. I think there's some things you can say, you can add a tax and you can have another thing that removes it, but you can't put them together, I think.
I think what we can submit to council is different than what we can put on the ballot. I think that we're talking about a 3+ year implementation for the income tax because we don't think it ought to go on the ballot this fall. We ought to take our time and do it right and sell it, which is why we've got to have the near-term things. So we need to stop worrying about this November as a vote.
Correct. So that's my. So the motion is to say we all are in agreement. Gosh darn it! This will be part of our package of recommendations. Now, Becky, to your point, if we get through these other things and we find on the last day we've got 4 extra hours of discussion time, great. Let's dig into what the 3 different schedules could look like of recommendations and some of these various options. But I think it's more important for us to deal with the elements that will help fix this problem in the next 3 to 5 years before we dive into the longer term solution.
Okay, we have Ray and then Beth.
Yeah, it's a great question, Barry. I like Keith's idea, but I think it might be a little premature at this moment to recommend making that recommendation to the council. I think we should flesh this out a little bit better.
Beth Vargas Duncan, and thank you, Ray. That was a perfect setup for me. So I see us getting stuck as a group. I mean, one, congratulations. I do think we're all very interested, even Bill and TJ, on this topic. So, and I appreciate the motion that we have on the floor right now, but what I'm thinking is maybe we start looking to vote on Will's motion and or Keith, sorry. I know I will know Norris, that's my problem. So that we vote on that and kind of do a hybrid and compromise here and work on having a subgroup of people continuing to flesh out this topic apart from our meetings. and look at what fees would be removed, what progressive options would look like, and then come back and have that knitted up for us already so we don't take our precious group time here on that. So that's my suggestion.
Bill, and then.
Right. So I agree with Beth that we don't want to hammer that out here. Therefore, I suggest that Russ Beaton, who has already had several discussions outside this group with a variety of people, some in the chamber, some outside the chamber, in fact, basically functioning as a kind of unofficial subcommittee leader, I think that it would be best if Russ sat down with city staff, okay, upon whom these are the people we're dependent on for our numbers, and Moss Adams, and came back next time with a range of choices that we could then incorporate into our discussion and our report to the council.
Stephen Jenkins, I 2 points. One is, looking back at our roles and responsibilities, I don't think it's our role or our responsibility to decide which things we cut, right? Our role and responsibilities are focused on revenue options. And so with our, we've talked a lot about on our limited time. If our limited time and we barely have enough time to get through the revenue options, why are we focused on the things we cut? I think those are political questions that can be considered by the council. I think the second point that I have is, again, in terms of developing particular ranges of options, again, do we have the time to do that? I mean, we could create a small group. I think we'd come back to another meeting and spend another 4 hours in a meeting trying to pick which of the three options when we've got a lot of other things we need to discuss as well. Again, I think that's why we have elected leaders. None of us are elected leaders. Well, some of us maybe. That's not our role. It's a political question, again, in terms of what the city council believes they can get onto a ballot and have passed at some point. And so I don't know that's our most important role here.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Russ?
I'd like to remind us that a recommendation to the council that they look at it, Keith's motion, and a recommendation from this task force that we do that are two different things. They're not necessarily contradictory. I mean, following Beth and Bill's suggestions that we look into it more fully, we could pass this motion and then we could, through our own study between here and now, which will not be done in just the last 4 hours, Keith, we might decide, okay, by then we know more about it and we'd like to up the recommendation that they do it, or something like that. I want to say that the staff has already reached out to me, and I've agreed to meet with them to explain it. And Josh and I, if we ever get a break tonight, will probably set a time for that. And so the effort to understand better what has been proposed is, from the staff's point of view, is already underway. I would like to say one more thing, that I'm not, and these numbers are for our understanding of the potential of an income tax. And I'm not sure if we ever made a recommendation to the city council that any particular numbers, maybe an array of things for them, would be appropriate. That we're not recommending they pass a tax that does exactly this. They're going to do what they're going to do anyway when they hear the recommendation from whatever this task force says.
And so I think with that, Sean, and in the interest of moving it forward, right, I would suggest we call the question of it, because I think Russ laid out kind of what the goal is there, right, of we get this recommendation is in, a body can always choose to alter whatever its prior motions are. So, right, if there are further discussions later on, we can, in more information that we actually have that can inform the recommendation in greater detail, great.
The question is called then. You're calling the question?
I'm suggesting you do.
Oh, okay. All right. I will call the question. You second my calling the question? Okay, very good. All in favor of calling the question? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we vote on the motion. All in favor of the motion on the table?
Aye.
Any opposed? I hear no opposition. Okay, motion passes.
Does that motion that we just passed include having Russ meet with staff? No. Yeah. So if it doesn't, then I would like to make a motion that, that Russ Beaton meet with city staff and Moss Adams and come back to this body for the next meeting with a range of options, preferably 3 different income tax schedules for illustrative purposes only. Okay. And the second part would be that the city staff provide us with the numbers that tell us how much money would be involved if we cut the operations fee and the streetlight fee.
Beth? Yeah.
I'll second that motion, but I'd like to make a friendly amendment at the same time. Beth Vargas Duncan. And I would like to suggest that we make sure that the recommendation comes back in writing a week before our meeting.
I'm happy to accept that.
Okay, the motion has been amended and seconded. Any discussion on that?
Yeah, so the week before the meeting is 1 week from now, I believe, of the next meeting. So that's a really tight timeline for that particular request with a lot of information. I presume perhaps all that information currently exists. Really tight timeline. The other thing I would say is, while I think this is an idea that warrants further exploration, it is also one that we're all generally supportive of, and yet continues to take up time of these meetings. And I imagine there is a greater diversity of topics and income and revenue options that we will need to discuss at the next meeting as well. And so I think trying to balance that prioritization of greater and greater detail on a particular option that is multiple years out with limited political viability, what's the prioritization of the group there?
Bill, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yeah, well, my response to Keith's comments is that we need to be able to build a powerful narrative for the City Council when we present our recommendations. And the more information we have, the more illustrations we can provide, the more powerful our argument will be.
Just as a point of clarification, Russ, do you agree to this motion? Because if you say no, then it doesn't really matter what we can't make you do it.
Your wish is my command.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion or against it? Or seeing none, we'll take it to a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Everyone opposed say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. Yes, we can. Do you guys want a break now? Break? Okay, I'm going to go 5-minute break. Bing. If we could bring the meeting back to order.
Are we officially called back to order?
We are.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for that discussion and debate. It's exciting to see this group being able to discuss things, get through things, make motions, and move forward as well. So that's our hope for this next section, is that we can get through a lot of the items that ultimately will not be a primary topic of focus, so that we can spend a lot more of your time on useful, substantive discussion as well. So in order to do that, we had sent out a survey, and we sent back those survey responses to you all last Tuesday, and we'd asked you to rate the remaining options, and then we put together basically a sentiment of things that received positive sentiment, neutral sentiment, negative sentiment, depending on how you all voted in alignment with this sentence. I am interested in examining this revenue option in further depth. So we have 6 that were positive, 1 neutral, and 19 that were overall negative. So we're going to start with the overall negative items. And the question really is, so these are some that had strong negative sentiment. These are in your packet as well. So the question for the group here is, are there any on this list that anyone feels very strongly about moving to the high interest list? Or would there be a motion to potentially move these off of consideration?
I move that we remove these from consideration.
Any discussion on that? Ray?
Just to be clear, you're talking about all the stuff on the medium, or just? Okay, thank you. I should look up.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. They are removed.
Very efficient work, thank you. All right, I'm going to move to the mild negative sentiment options. We have several on this list as well, and the same question for you all. Do any of these items, does anyone feel strongly about moving any of these to a high interest for further consideration, or can these be moved off of consideration at this time?
The operations fee increase and the parking tax increase might be needed for a near-term solution, so I'd hate to lose them completely, and we might need more information on them. I move that we keep those 2 alive and ditch the rest.
So the motion is to keep 2 alive and remove the rest from consideration? Is that the motion?
Yeah, ops fee increase and parking tax increase. Keep alive. Not because we like them, but because we might have to have some.
Okay, and that motion has a second? Okay, discussion. I think I saw Beth first, then we'll go Scott.
Beth Vargas Duncan. Oh, sorry.
You said your full name. You go first.
Beth Vargas Duncan, in the utmost, conservative. I just potentially a state conflict of interest. I work for Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association, and our members pay franchise fees, and our members also could be subject to a gross receipts tax. So I just want to note that before I vote.
Scott?
Scott Cantonwine. In the interest of discussion, I would propose that we amend the motion to keep franchise fee increases and higher new fees for services. Keep those away from being taken off the list.
I would, to speak to franchise fees, I would note, if I remember correctly from the information we've been given, that we are almost maxed out on them as it is legally, and we can only raise them a very tiny bit from here. Am I wrong about that?
If I may, Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. We have a range of franchise fees, gas, cable, things like that. The 2 that we are not capped out on are solid waste, garbage hauling, and then our own water, wastewater, stormwater utility.
Becky Beam, I accept proposed amendment.
Okay, so franchise fees and higher services for fees. That correct? So the motion on the floor now is we leave in operations fees, parking, franchise fees, and higher services, or higher fees for services. And everything else on the list is out. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you. All right, the last grouping that we have here are the neutral and positive sentiment grouping. Some of the things that I will note here is that transient occupancy tax, the majority of that cannot be spent for general fund revenue. Local gas tax is similarly or separately, but likewise restricted in terms of those do not fund the general fund directly. And the sale of surplus property is also an area that would not be a sustainable revenue source, which was one of the criteria for this group. So I leave you with that context as well.
Question on clarification on that. So the local gas tax, I believe, is restricted in terms of its source from state law. Is the transient occupancy tax, that one is that limited by state law, or is that current city policy that limits the transient occupancy tax?
And I will turn that over to Josh Eggleston to respond to that question.
It's actually a combination of both. So we have in our city charter as well as in state law, but generally it's restricted to tourism.
And
Josh, before you go away, Bill Smaldone, but isn't there a fight going on now about the transit occupancy tax because we just applied a portion of surplus tax to the library?
No, there is not. So the amount that was transferred from the Cultural Tourism Fund originated from American Rescue Act dollars.
So it was not TOT money?
It is not TOT dollars.
Josh, to that, further kind of clarification on that, though, you say it's a combination in the city charter. What is the definition of tourism on that? And who gets to interpret that definition?
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So our charter restricts the transit occupancy tax to basically 3 uses: urban beautification, cultural facilities, and tourism marketing. There's an additional overlay of state law. Law was passed in 2003 that requires us to maintain our percentage allocation between 2 tourism-related uses specified in state law and other things. So a lot of jurisdictions, when they pass their transient occupancy tax, just use it for general fund. You can spend it on anything sort of thing. The law was changed in 2003 to require a certain percentage of those taxes to be used for purely tourism types of uses. So that does apply to us, but essentially we need to keep our allocation the same as it was in 2003, for lack of a better explanation. So long story short, if we want to increase our TOT tax percentage, most of that money will be spent strictly on tourism-related facilities such as the convention center, other tourism-related facilities that bring tourists into town, and then tourism marketing.
Some of that money, if I'm correct, also goes to parks and other things that are funded out of the general fund, right? And so any increase in that fund would help on the general fund side, at least to a small degree.
Correct, indirectly.
I think we've discussed tonight that Bill Rickey, sorry. I think we discussed tonight that we need a Band-Aid fix, right? And we need something for long-term and maybe something in between there as well. I would argue to Moss Adams' point that the sale of surplus property isn't something that is ongoing, but it might be the Band-Aid we need. And there may be a lot of it, I don't know, but it might be the Band-Aid we need.
Based on Bill's comment, I would like to keep under consideration in case we need Band-Aids. The Urban Renewal Agency, the first one, the restaurant tax, the special districts formation with the library in mind, and the sale of surplus property, and kick the rest of them off.
Second.
If I could ask, how, outside of real estate, how much surplus property does the city of Salem have? Is there anything there? Is that $1 million, $5,000?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. As far as equipment, we don't have good numbers on what that would look like. I will say most real estate is restricted to some other fund. It's either transportation related. It was purchased by general obligation bonds, purchased by system development charges. There's very few sales of surplus property that would result in general fund dollars coming back to the city that are unrestricted.
Is that only real property that's restricted, or equipment would not be restricted?
Equipment would also be restricted. So for example, like dump trucks or street sweepers, those would go back to either the utility fund or the transportation fund.
Becky, could you restate your motion?
Do we want to keep sale of surplus property or drop it based on that information? I see a thumbs down. Okay. I want to retain Urban Renewal Agency, increase frozen base, restaurant tax, and special districts formation, and dump the rest of them. So I changed it. Does the second accept? Okay.
Motion with the second. Anyone want to speak to it?
Becky, I would ask to amend it to include the transient occupancy tax increase as well, and further exploration of that.
I'll accept that. I don't have a problem with it, although I don't like making the homeless pay taxes, more taxes for staying in a hotel. But yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, friendly motion was, did we have a second on that? I assume you're seconding your friendly motion. Should see accepted it. Beth, go ahead.
It's okay. It won't help.
I would like, Beth Vargas Duncan, I'd like to learn more about the vacancy tax. I think that vacant dwelling or building structures are not great in the city, so I'd like to keep that one.
Didn't we have, what number was that? Wasn't that on our list? Vacancy tax. Yeah, that's that one. I'm looking at the bigger page that's got more information. Yeah. Thank you. Unknown resident, unknown legal authority, high complexity, 2 to 5 years. So it wouldn't be a near-term thing. Do we want to keep it? Show me the Roman, kill them or keep them. We got keep them, so I'll keep. Will my second accept that? So are there any? So we're ditching the local gas tax and the sale of surplus property is all we're ditching.
Should we clarify the motion then, that just do the two that we're getting rid of? Okay. That's simpler. Jean?
Mike.
Oh, sorry, the mic. Oh, I've got this one now. Jean Palmetier, you know, all of these items on here have some appropriateness. I'd like to, you propose to ditch the special districts formation of it? Keep it. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. Comment over.
So I'll restate, we're talking about ditching the local gas tax and the sale of surplus property. That's all.
Yeah, Bill Rickey,
Further discussion on taking out those two.
Yeah, Bill Rickey, you know, I would say that I'm okay with taking out sales surplus property. It's something that I'm pretty passionate about for lots of reasons. But I'm curious, what other things have we been presented that just won't work, right? So this was sell surplus property, but it wouldn't net anything. Let's say for whatever reason we implemented that, and the city would come back and say, well, no, you actually can't do that. Are there more in here that we've wasted time and energy on that are similar?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out as we go forward. I don't know the answer to that question. Raquel?
Thank you, Raquel Moore Green. I do have a question about the sale of surplus property, and that's around the office buildings and whether or not they're being fully utilized by staff, that staff is back Monday through Friday, or are post-pandemic is my question, because I know at the state not everybody has been required to come back to work physically in the buildings, and we've got at the state level quite a bit of property sitting vacant, and I know that they're considering things around that. But is the city of Salem in that position at all?
Krishna Namburi, Deputy City Manager for Enterprise Services Department. So most of the city employees are in hybrid work model, and there is only one, a part of the IT department is 100% remote. So we did consolidate a lot of divisions and sections under that particular building, but the rest of the buildings are mostly in hybrid model, so we really did not gain much physical space because of that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I suppose the recommendation there then could be that you further consolidate people into a building that they rotate through. I mean, if you've got 10 buildings and they're all only partially full through rotation, certainly something on efficiency could be done. Just a comment.
Okay,
thank you.
Any further comments or questions, arguments? Okay.
Hey,
all in favor? Oh, sorry.
Zach Ostertag, State of Oregon. I just note that the state recently put forward a new space utilization policy that might be worth taking a look at to take into account that exact sort of dynamic with hybrid work and consolidating space.
All right. All in favor of getting rid of these two, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it.
All right, so we're going to come back to these options, but I also wanted to look at the high interest option. I know that we have struck the bottom two off of this list, but wanted to open this back up. Are there any additional items that we would have interest in removing from further consideration from this grouping?
Yeah, Bill Rickey, I would like to remove business license fee and corporate income tax.
Since it's been moved and seconded, I just want to repeat what I think I heard, and I can be corrected if I'm remembering wrong. The business license fee that was implemented in Medford was kind of a nominal fee that brought in some information that was needed by first responders so that they knew what they were getting into when they went to that building. So I would like to keep it on the list, not necessarily because it's a revenue source, but because it can make life easier for the people that have to do their jobs, which is kind of a revenue thing.
Bill Rickey, Becky, I think your heart's in the right place, but we're not tasked with making life easier for first responders. We're tasked with generating revenue. And I'll tell you this, just as a business owner, you know, if you have hazardous material inside your building, you're required by law to have that posted by a placard on your door, so that when fire department gets there, they know what chemical or water or not to use in order to put out your fire. In terms of being able to track personnel, for example, I have roughly 50 employees that work for me, and maybe 6 of them are actually at my facility every day. The rest of them are out and about working in our community or within our state somewhere. So I think you might be, you know, good information in is good information out, but I don't know that you're going to get that from something like this.
So I'll move one over here. Sorry,
Bill Smoldon, don't we have a business license fee?
I can actually talk to that because it's my department. And the answer is some businesses pay license fees, not all businesses. So marijuana businesses pay a license fee. Uber and Lyft have to pay a license fee. If you have a mobile food cart, you have to pay a license fee.
Right.
So you have a mobile food cart, you have to pay a license fee, but if you're a restaurant, you don't.
So I'm just wondering, since we are sort of keeping our powder dry on a number of rather regressive taxes that we might need in the short run, since this is already, in a sense, set up, does it make sense to jettison it or to keep it in the mix for now? And I would suggest we keep it in the mix for the moment.
Speaking to Bill's comments, something that was evident in the public surveys was minimizing impact on local economy. And both the business license fee and the corporate income tax have been clearly identified as potentially harmful to the local economy. So I would keep those. The people have said that's a priority. We've identified these as harmful. I don't feel like those go together.
As a point of clarification, the community is sending you mixed signals as well, because in terms of community funding type approval, that was one of the higher options that came in with 50% approval for that. So you do, as a group, need to wrestle with the fact that you have different opinions within your community that are going to be coming forward on that as well.
And Ray?
Ray Corsenberry. I was just sort of curious, of the license fees we have now, how much money does that generate?
Most of them are under $200. The marijuana license fee is $100. The short-term rental license fee is $150, and I think most of the others are around $150.
So we're talking maybe thousands rather than...
Right. Currently, the way it's implemented, it's probably costs more to administer, but if it were citywide, and we get people all the time who come in and expect that to do business in Salem, they're supposed to pay a license because most other cities have it.
Okay.
Ariel Lovell, Ward 2. I just want to put forward that speaking to this bill, I see that you're obviously very passionate about it. It's also a personal interest for you. A lot of these people that will be implemented by this obviously are here. And I think going forward, we should keep that in mind.
For me, speaking against the motion is mostly because they're two very different taxes, and I would be like for one and maybe against the other. So I don't feel that they're connected in perhaps the way others do. So, I mean, for me, that would be a tough vote to take, actually. And I would be affected by both of those taxes, and that'd still be for one and against the other.
I guess you bring up a very good point, both of you do, but a tax on a business, I think it's important that you keep in mind that that's what both of these are, even though you can dress one up and call it a licensing fee. You're not going to hurt Walmart. You're not going to hurt Home Depot, corporations like that. You're going to hurt the small business that this community thrives on, that funds the Little Leagues, that funds Boys and Girls Club, the businesses that donate to the nonprofits, the businesses that put on the concerts at the fairgrounds that help the needy, right? Those are the businesses you're going to hurt when you implement these things. The other businesses will just pass it through to you as a consumer, the large ones. When you do a corporate income tax, for example, the state implemented the corporate activity tax, and the buffer there was if your business made more than $1 million, you had to pay that tax. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's not difficult to have a business that makes $1 million. That's not hard. Have a business that keeps $1 million that they make is very difficult. Now, I don't care if you make $1 million, you make 5, you make 10, you make 20. It's hard to keep money. It's very expensive to operate a business. And you continue to do this, and next thing you know, businesses in this community are not able to support the community. You're not able to buy the scoreboard at Blanchette Catholic High School when they needed one. You're not able to sponsor 2 Little League teams this year when the league calls you and says, hey, we have no sponsorship this year. Is there any way you could do 1 or 2 teams? That's real, and it's in this community. This is not a large, thriving community with huge industry and big businesses here to pay this fee. This would be put on the backs of businesses that have roughly 50 or less employees. You're not going to affect the people I think that you think you will affect. You're going to hurt everyone by what you do to small businesses in this community. Just as a business owner, wanted to share that with you.
Here we have Becky, Beth, and Jean all coming up.
I talked briefly to Bill at the break, and I understood where he was coming from, and this idea of taxing the Walmarts, but letting Bill subtract from his tax bill the money he spent on the scoreboard and sponsoring Little League as deductions seemed to be, so I'll tax the companies that aren't supporting these things but are making money, but I won't tax the guys who are supporting the community ones. I don't want to get rid of them, not because I know how I want to use them, but because we might need them. And keeping them on the list does not mean that they're going to be in our final recommendation. That's it.
Beth Vargas Duncan, I appreciate the sentiments and the concerns, but when I wrote with staff a long time ago, I'm not going to say how long, but it was a few decades, I think, a business license tax for this city, it was graduated. And so even, folks that have a vacation rental often pay $100 a year, and their revenue is probably much less than most businesses in this community. And, as a business, I appreciate definitely scoreboards at Blanchette or whatever your charity of choice is, but I think the community should also be supported as well.
Sorry. Jean Palmetier. My comment has to do with the 50% approval. It's really easy for people to, look at other people's money for tax purposes. And to me, these two stand out in that area. And you'll notice wherever there's a very low support, it has to do with money out of my pocket. And so I do believe that when we look at these in the holistic way we are trying to look at them, we have to consider, the source of information, and that's my comment. I support keeping them on the list simply to, and Becky's point is they may be needed in a short term. Very many high profile sources here.
Russ, and then.
Well, of course, everybody's favorite tax is a tax on someone else, okay? In my experience, the instincts that give people a desire for a corporate tax are generally angled at the Exxons and the General Electrics and all that. I think it is very hard to equitably structure a corporate income tax or a business tax because the margins are so different that you can hurt one business and it doesn't even affect another. But it's because of the uncertainties and the vagaries that occur in there that it makes that tax very tough to assess the actual incidence.
Alrighty, one more comment. You want to do the last one? You want to give? Okay.
No, you go.
One more comment, and then I'm going to call the question because it's 8:57.
So I was wondering if the maker of the motion might be willing to split the motion to vote on each of them separately. One reason I think that that's worth doing is because the corporate income tax, according to our chart, would take 2 to 5 years to implement. So it's not really in the mix for a short-term fix. So that makes it fundamentally different than the first one, to my mind. So I'd like to see them, I'd like to vote on these two items separately if the maker of the motion would concur.
I would agree to that.
Okay, we'll call that the motion then. So let's vote on the first one first then, and that is the business license fee, correct? The vote is to
Remove it.
ditch it. Yeah, right. A yes vote is a vote to remove the business license fee. All in favor of removing the business license fee, say aye. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
The nays have it. Moving on to the next one, the corporate income tax. All in favor of removing the corporate income tax, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The nays had it the first time, the ayes had it the second time. Okay.
Thank you for that discussion. So at this point in time, you have 12 high interest options. So you have a few on this list. We are retaining business license fees, local option property tax levy, and personal income tax. And then from the previous list, in order of most negative sentiment to most positive, the operations fee increase, parking tax increase, new fees for service, franchise fee increase, urban renewal agency increase frozen base, TOT, vacancy tax for the empty dwelling fee, the restaurant tax, and the special district formation. So my question for this group is, of that list of 12, which is still a quite lengthy list in terms of discussion, if the goal is for your next meeting to spend that whole meeting in discussion of these options and how you might put them forward, I open this up to the group. Is it worth having any further conversation this evening about potentially removing any of these items?
It's 8:50. Oh, okay. Becky.
I'd like to see us arrange for a subgroup to meet and discuss some of these that are appropriate for short-term use, to see if there's anything we can pair off or recommend keeping more strongly.
One point for that idea is that we have 2 weeks between now and the next meeting as well, so just offering that as a potential time constraint.
Zach Ostertag, could I ask that of the options that are left, that the task force receive perhaps them grouped by like time frame or something like that? So we've talked, it sounds like there's been somewhat consensus around kind of some sort of general short-term recommendation and long-term recommendation, and maybe that's one final product, or maybe that's two separate final products, but just generally trying to group things together, and that might just break this up as much as we can of those 12. So would Moss Adams be willing to do that for us, just as a summary takeaway?
Yes, and you've actually beaten us to the punch. So that was the intention for the next meeting, is that we're going to structure it with the short term and then the longer term options. So fantastic.
Yes, Stephen Jenkins. I'm also wondering perhaps another survey, and instead of like negative, positive sentiment, force everybody to rank each. So there's 12 options, 1 through 12, right? So we can get a sense of where we focus our energy.
I'm curious, would the group be in favor of potentially also having us break this into 2 options, so nearer term options, longer term options, and then get additional feedback on those items? In that case, I would also put forward one area that we did not get to in tonight's conversation were these potential additional longer term options, so we can add that into the survey as well to support the conversation. But this is 6 additional whole potential areas for discussion at the next group as well. So I will just flag that.
Bill?
I have a question. Bill Smaldone, I have a question about the local option property tax levy. Last time,
I'm sorry, if I can interrupt you, can I have do you guys want to continue the meeting? If so, could I have a motion to continue the meeting for 10 minutes? So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay, so the meeting will adjourn at 9:10.
So if memory serves, normally when, or often when we have a local option property tax, it's targeted at some specific general fund service. I assume it's also possible to go forward with a local option property tax levy to fund the entire general fund.
I believe that is correct. Correct me if I am wrong on that, Josh.
The gap in the fund.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Is it possible, looking at the local option levy, for, to look at where it is that we are come under compression, what parts of the city? I mean, my understanding is, generally speaking, West Salem is not under compression and South Salem is under compression, but I don't know the specifics, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and that discussion did come up last time, and I have reached out to the mayor and county assessor to get some more detail about the characteristics of those properties, but we can certainly get you a general idea. It is all on the Marion County side.
Any further questions or discussion? If not, we can adjourn before 9:10. So moved. We are adjourned.